Thank you. Thank you very much. Tariq says that Europeans associate Islam with violence. There is some truth in that. There is also a very obvious reason for that, which is that Islam is associated with violence. It was not Buddhists who flew planes into the Twin Towers. It was not Hindus or Jews that blew up the London Underground in buses a few years ago. And that simple fact has to be acknowledged if you're even going to start a dialogue. Now, what is happening, ladies and gentlemen, it's not a pantomime. I'd argue that Europe has done not too badly, considering the circumstances. In the middle of the last century, there was an almost negligible Muslim presence in Europe. At the turn of the 21st, in Western Europe alone, there were 15 to 17 million Muslims. That's a very fast migration, ladies and gentlemen, one of the fastest in human history. And no society would find it easy to deal with that kind of migration. As it happens, European societies, Western European societies have, I think, dealt with this much better than some would. Certainly, Muslims coming to live in Britain and in Western Europe enjoy more rights and better rights, among them freedom of worship, than they do in any Islamic country in the earth here today. We do have a problem. We have a problem when the failures of Islam throughout the world, the failures of all Islamic societies, come here into Britain. Their intolerance of freedom of conscience, their intolerance of apostates, their intolerance of freedom of expression and freedom of speech, their intolerance of minorities, other religious minorities, sexual minorities, their intolerance of gays, their dislike and distrust of half of the population, women, and many, many other things. And the call, what's more, for a parallel legal system within Britain and European societies. This is monstrous. No other group behaves like this, asks for parallel laws. This is a fundamental problem, and it's one we're going to have to deal with. It's a problem between a society, Western Europe, that believes that laws are based on reason, and Islam that believes that they are based on revelation. Between these two ideas, I'm not sure there is very much compromise for Europe. It is not Europe that has let down its Muslims, but the Muslims of Europe that have let down Europe. This is not solely something which we have to say we can never reconcile. Of course we can reconcile this, but we need to be honest about it. We need to be frank about it, and we cannot avoid things just because they are unpleasant. And if there were one thing I would wish Muslims in Europe could learn today, as fast as possible, it would be this: that you have no right in this society not to be offended. You have no right to say that because you don't like something you can commit violence, or you would like something to be stopped or censored. You have no right to have more hate laws or hate crime laws or hate speech laws just to defend Islam. You have to realize, the Muslims of Europe have to realize, that a society in which even your deepest feelings can be trodden upon is the only society worth living in. And the sooner we can learn that, the sooner that Islam can learn that within Europe, the better. It is not Europe that has failed its Muslims. It is Islam that has failed Europe. I'd argue Islam has failed its Muslims. Thank you.
If you had a daughter or a son that wanted to become a Muslim, would you be happy about that? I don't think so.
Hypothetically speaking, Douglas Murray, what would you say to that lady?
No, of course it wouldn't bother me. I mean, I would hope that if somebody has access... Look, what Fleming and I are arguing for is that people have the right to access all of the kind of opinions, all of the knowledge that they can. That means, among other things, having, for instance, access to all of the criticism that should be written of the Quran and of Islam. And if they weigh up after knowing all of these things and having access to all of them that they would like to become Muslim, I don't have a problem with that.
All right. Good, you answered the question. Petra?
When my daughter was born in '98, I called her Soraya, which is the Arabic name for Pleiades, because I felt that she needed to have a present for the rest of her life. After 9/11, people asked me whether I had regretted giving her an Arabic name. And I felt sorry for the person who asked that question.
That there's prejudice against...
No, the point I'm making is, and I think it's the point the lady is making as well, that the fact that people are called Muhammad is probably, in the perception of many, putting them in a disadvantage. Right. And of course I totally disagree.
Okay. You want to come, because I want to get some response to what we heard out, some of the comments our audience made.
I'd just like to make a comment on one of the cases that Petra made, which was about Ahmed Abu Taleb, a very distinguished public figure in Holland. What you failed to mention when you mentioned him as a great success story of the Netherlands, which I agree he is that after the murder of Theo van Gogh in 2004, he had to go under 24-hour protection because his name was found on a hit list from a radical cell nearby. We cannot simply take, Petra, the terrific success stories and ignore things like that. It is no small thing that a Muslim politician who speaks out should be targeted for assassination in his home country of the Netherlands.
Many Muslims and Muslims
yeah, Tariq Ramadan, we get the point, yeah.
Once again, I think that you are taking one story and then
it was the one she took.
No, it is, and many Muslims around the world and in the Netherlands were against that and attacked the small groups that were saying this. And this is the case today in Europe. The discourse that you have is helping to nurture this sense of alienation and not to let the Muslims feel that they are at home. And out of the questions that we got from here, people are saying, you are welcome here, and then in their own country. I'm sorry, I'm at home. I'm at home. What are you talking about? Don't talk about. So, talk to me. I'm sorry. Talk to us, or talk to me as a fellow European, and not as someone who is an outsider infiltrating the freedom of expression and using this. This is one. Let me finish.
Can I come back to that? No, I'm not saying you're not a European, but I would appreciate the following, which is that don't come to this hall and tell this hall that you're a European, and go to another and talk to an Islamic audience as Islamic brothers, because that is what you have spent your career doing.
What's wrong?
Speaking through. Let me finish this. And Tariq comes here one day and says, we fellow Europeans, we all speak to each other as fellow Europeans. And another, he speaks to a Muslim audience and says, we as Muslims. Which is it, Tariq? Which is it?
I'm a Muslim.
You can't pretend you have two identities. Come and just
you know what?
Can I say something about
But you are my...
Okay, you two, just a minute. Douglas, I want to ask you, you heard some of the people from the floor there, the woman complaining about attacks on her because she's described as a scarfie, because she wears a head veil. I mean, that is something that you would regret. I mean, that doesn't promote social cohesion, does it?
Nobody thinks that any physical attacks or any such thing could be a good thing to happen. Of course not. Of course there are. Let's make sure we're right.
Talking about
prejudice exists in society. Let's just be absolutely clear as an audience. Prejudice undoubtedly exists in this society. It exists across racial groups, including from minorities to other minorities, after all, which is one of the things we see increasingly in Britain these days. And it is also the case that people, in particularly famously lower socioeconomic groups, are likely to feel hatred for other groups. That is one of the things that has to be tackled, and everyone, I think, in this hall, I'm sure, we're in agreement that that should be tackled. But do not mix up somebody, a thug, a racist, and so on, attacking somebody in a street with the right of Fleming and me to say what we see in the Quran, what we think of Muhammad, and maybe even asserting our right to say so.
Okay, all right, now...
Thank you. Well, first of all, just to pick up on a couple of people, particularly women, who've said about the terrific things that Islam gives women in terms of rights. The first thing is, yes, in 7th century Arabia, some of this was progressive. In 21st century Britain, it is not. And you have to make that fundamental admission that the Quran is not a document for women's rights in Europe in 2010. It is not. Secondly, why is it that only Islamic societies and mosques in this country are places which teach and preach hatred of other minorities? Every single week in this country, there are people on campuses who teach the murder of minorities. Last week, it was somebody who calls for the murder of apostates. The week before, at another university, it was somebody who believes the Jews are fair game. This is not tolerable. It is not tolerable for Muslims. It is not tolerable from anyone else. You, I hope, would agree with me that any minority that engaged in such hatred and bigotry should be criticized. Don't pretend that the cloak of Islam And Islamic belief and religious fervour means that people like us cannot say that people who call for the murder of minorities are not mainstream, are not acceptable, and have to be critiqued.